Hello, I'm Mark Riley, and I ask you now to put your life in my hands and climb on board my musical time machine. A rickety rust bucket of time travel, a backfiring jalopy which, despite its lack of MOT, will safely steer us back through the years to visit the famous and notorious characters ensconced within the BBC archive. Now, whilst the BBC archive is regularly plundered for its musical recordings, say like those Peel sessions or tracks from Glastonbury, most of the speech archive languishes unloved and unheard. Often this material hasn't been heard since it was first broadcast, which could have been decades earlier. My job, via my time machine, is to open up this treasure trove to the world. In this episode, we look at one of the great partnerships in pop, namely David Bowie and Iggy Pop, and the fruitful time they spent together in Berlin in the mid-70s. So coming up a little later, we have Iggy from 1990, but first we need to go back a little further than that, to 1977. So let's see what happened that year. Jimmy Carter had just succeeded Gerald Ford as the 39th President of the United States, whilst in the UK, Queen Elizabeth II celebrates her Silver Jubilee. Blissfully unconcerned about the outbreak of punk rock in the pubs and clubs of Britain, Led Zeppelin set a new world record attendance for an indoor concert. 76,226 persons, if you're interested. In film, George Lucas's Star Wars was presented to the world, and in the realms of sugar-coated pop music, Fleetwood Mac unleashed the middle-of-the-road phenomena known as rumours. Meanwhile, living in an apartment at Hauptstrasse 155 Schönberg, Berlin, David Bowie was taking stock of his life after a notoriously drug-fueled but creatively outstanding few years. Painfully thin, having survived a 2-year regime on what has since become known as a white diet, cocaine and milk, Bowie, as Bowie does, retreated to the German capital to feast on its largely unexploited cultural riches. A new genre of music had appeared. We now reverentially refer to it as krautrock. The Germans don't. Bands like Neu!, Faust, Can, and particularly Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk impressed David with their motoric beats and often guitarless musical soundscapes, all of which helped shape Bowie's output at that time. 3 classic albums, namely Low, Heroes and Lodger, all made in Berlin with a number of key collaborators. You're about to hear David Bowie in conversation with Radio 1's Stuart Grundy, who is tentatively pussyfooting around an issue seemingly concerning Bowie's former colleagues and sidekicks. Well, Stuart, what exactly is it you're driving at?
What I'm really driving at, I suppose, is that once upon a time there was David Bowie, and then there was the band, a band.
Yeah.
Have you tired, perhaps, of carrying all the responsibility on your own shoulders, or is this just a natural progression for you?
Well, yeah, I think it's a natural progression in as much that I needed somebody to work with, to relate to, if I was going to discover for myself how I was going to write in the future. I needed some help. I couldn't do it myself because I couldn't look at myself properly at the time. And I think I was very fortunate in deciding on such an empathetic git as Zeno to work with, who is an absolutely wonderful man, terrific. And in fact, the funniest thing really is that we spent, I think, for every hour that we recorded in the studio, he has an incredible sense of humour. I don't know whether you know Eno at all. Fripp and Eno and I think spent about 40 minutes of every 60 laughing. I mean, it's just incredibly surrealistic humour that Brian can come up with. And indeed Fripp. Fripp has that, much more down-to-earth type of humour.
Let me ask you about the lyrics, because it seems to me that your lyrics nowadays are becoming more obscure, unfathomable than they used to be.
Yes, they are, aren't they? Yeah. Well, there is a logic behind that. If only I could think of it. No, what I did, I'm working very much in fragment lyrics now, even more than I ever did. I mean, it started with Diamond Dogs. There are a couple of tracks on that were written with a lot of inspiration due to Burroughs' work. William Burroughs. And I've really taken the plunge on this last album, I suppose. And it's arrived at by putting together 3 or 4 statements at variance with each other, sometimes completely unrelated statements. And from those, say, arbitrary 3 statements, one arrives at a 4th piece of information from the rearrangement of what is involved. Now, that sounds like an awful easy thing to do. Well, it is, and I think everybody should do it.
I remember you telling me something before about writing things down on bits of paper and rearranging them. Is this what you literally do?
Yes, it's the cut-up technique, a cut-up technique. It was a very popular writing form in the 60s. I mean, it's sort of quite reactionary, really. I also like the spontaneous writing, just writing for the sake of it and then rereading it and seeing what came out. So you must understand, I mean, it all sounds incredibly indulgent, and indeed it is, because what I'm trying to do is mould the traditional methods of rock and roll with newer processes. I mean, it is a re-evaluation, and it is trying to find a new form of language, musically, or artistically, I guess, because I'm not a musician, but artistically.
But it does make the lyrics less accessible.
On surface level, but you see, I think that they are very accessible on a subconscious and emotional level. That was the point of cut-up writing, is that it didn't relate to linear thought at all. It worked very much on the spontaneous and immediate images that one gets in one's mind, especially when one's driving and thinks in incredibly fast shapes and forms. And it can relate very strongly on that level.
Blue, electric blue, that's the color of my room where I will live. Blue, blue. Pale blinds drawn all day. Nothing to read, nothing to say. Blue, blue. I will sit right down, waiting for the gift of sound and vision. And I will sing, waiting for the gift of sound and vision.
I hope you're enjoying your journey with us today aboard the musical time machine. I'll be serving tea and other non-alcoholic refreshments as our journey continues. A journey which has taken us back in time as I loot the BBC's spoken word archive to play you classic, candid and sometimes controversial clips that often haven't seen the light of day for decades. And this is Davy Bowie in conversation with the BBC's Stuart Grundy, October 1977. At this point, David Bowie has been in show business for approximately 16 years, and in that time has been influenced by Lionel Bart and Anthony Newley, mod bands such as The Who, as well as the Kinks, Dylan, Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, more of whom later. But recently, Bowie had been quoted as saying he's tired of being a pop star and would be quite happy to not sell any more records, so he could then concentrate on his painting. Disbelieving, Stuart Grundy had asked if this was right.
There's one bohemian half of me which sort of says, I wish they'd never buy another one, then I could go back and be a painter. And the other part says, well, who's going to gratify your ego then? And the other one says, well, I'll be a successful painter.
Well, that really prompts a question I was going to ask you right at the end. And I'll ask it now. I really wanted to know if at any time in your career you'd ever had to ask yourself the question, what the bloody hell am I doing? How did I get into this? I wish I could get out and be an ordinary person.
Oh, God. Yeah, and when Los Angeles, I mean, I was talking to myself and receiving those idiotic replies all the time. I'd quite cut down the middle there. And I really, some particular incident, which I really don't want to go into now, brought me back down to earth with a bump. And that's when I sort of decided to get out of that area of rock and roll that I always used to despise, and found that I'd sort of got myself involved in without really seeing that I was getting involved in it. And sort of dropped out again, to use an old term, and get back on my old Kerouac road and just travel again, you know, just to help me reevaluate, as I say. And so, along with that, being a personal problem, it applied to my work, of course, as it must do, because with me, the way I live is very much also part of what produces my work. So I have to keep examining my life to make sure that I'm in constant change and not getting too bloated with philosophic opulence. Keep sort of throwing bits and pieces away. And to change countries is one way of doing that.
Well, let me change tack. If I were to have one criticism of the Bowie of today, the Bowie on Low and Heroes, I'd say that we don't seem to be getting as much of your vocals as we used to do. In fact, I mean, almost the whole of the second side of Heroes is instrumental. I think that's a very great pity.
What can I say? I've only written that many songs, and the rest of it was instrumental. Yes, I'm sorry.
But you're obviously very happy with this album, I think you were saying earlier.
I'm happy with the album. I'm also happy with life in general, actually. I'm very content at the moment. I hope it goes on like this. It would be super.
From the Heroes album, V2 Schneider, Stuart Grundy grilling an artistically fulfilled, contented, self-confessed bohemian would-be painter David Bowie, 1977. Over the years, Bowie had forged close relationships with an array of hugely talented musicians and producers, one of which, Iggy Pop, we'll hear from shortly. There was also Mick Ronson, the platinum-haired axeman who helped create the thrilling sounds heard on Bowie's records from 1970's The Man Who Sold the World, right through to their last collaboration proper, Pin-Ups in 1973. Tony Visconti had been producing David's records off and on ever since, and was once again back in the fold. Also working with Bowie, empathetic git Brian Eno and guitar wizard Robert Fripp on his most recent album, Heroes. Back to 1977 and Berlin we go to find out exactly how this dream team worked together.
Yeah, there's a communication prospect with them approaching it when we approach any album, which is one knows that one's already defined one's area with them. I mean, we don't have to talk very much before we start playing anything.
You mean you've developed your own language or
Yes.
communication system?
Definitely. Yes. A bit like bats.
With these last two albums, you've certainly settled down into what is a more stable situation, I think. Does that mean that you're no longer the chameleon, or did you tire of creating new faces, new images for yourself?
Yes, I did tire of it. They were starting to get me down, in the States especially. I had all these people. I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I left Los Angeles, the way I psychologically rid myself of all those people for a bit was to open a wardrobe door and to push them in mentally, and then I locked the wardrobe door and I've still got the key, which I think is a sort of hedging one's bet, really. I mean, if I'd gone all the way, I should have thrown the key away, but I didn't.
Does that mean that when you came over to Europe, you really had quite enough of LA and its people, or what?
Not only LA and its people, but my approach to writing. I was tiring of the method that I was writing in. I wanted to develop a new language, and so I knew that my next move was to have to do that.
When I said I wanted to talk about the last two albums, my feeling about Low was, and you've already talked about Eno, was that there was as much Eno on that album as there was David Bowie. Is that a good thing, David?
I think there was an awful lot of Eno influence on the album. I think that sort of is fairly to be expected. I mean, when one works with somebody that one admires, one tends to sort of move more in their areas and give them wider berth for showing you something new. And I think that was fairly evident on Low. Although proportionate amount of work done was about equal. It was a collaboration, no doubt about that. I would be wary of committing myself to saying that it was one-sided on either part, though. This new album is even more successful blending of what we're doing, I think. Not quite so obviously this or that. It's a highly successful collaboration, the new one. And with the addition of Fripp as middleman, I think that helps an awful lot as well.
From Bowie's metallic masterpiece Heroes, and featuring the deft touch of Robert Fripp on guitar, Beauty and the Beast. As well as singer, songwriter, musician, painter, actor and mime artist, Bowie had also cast himself occasionally in the role of record producer. His most successful production job up to that point being Lou Reed's camp masterpiece Transformer, an album about which some journalists accused Bowie of trying to turn the New York legend into a thinly veiled replica of his own glam self. A vanity project, something Bowie's always vehemently denied. Steady how you go, Stuart.
You've produced a couple of albums with Iggy, and my feeling is that he is becoming very Bowie-esque.
Well, you know, I think there was probably a little bit too much of me than was necessary on Idiot, but I think that was more because Iggy was still feeling his way again after a considerable absence from things. But I would tend to disagree. I think Lust for Life is far more like the old Iggy than anything he's done for a long time. And he really is very much his own boss, you know. I think that he's been able to shake my phantom off fairly quickly, considering, which is, I know it's unfortunate, but never a time I get involved with an artist, I mean, that always tends to be one of the criticisms levelled at anything that comes as a result of our working together. But I think Iggy's going to get even stronger in the future.
So you do think you've avoided most of the inherent dangers in that sort of professional relationship?
I don't know, you see. I mean, I hope so, for his sake. I mean, you know, it's... and he seems very happy with things as they are. He fully intends to do another album with me, so I can't see that we've gone very wrong as far as he's concerned, and it's him that it's all about. So it's most important that he feels at ease with the situation.
Okay, well, the producer's just been giving us the wind-up here, so let me ask you a couple of quick questions, right? You seem to have been spending a bit of time over here recently, at least, you know, if one looks at the press, we've seen your photograph on various occasions. Have you...
Yeah, that's misleading, actually. I've been over here quite a bit, yes, but I've also been in the Far East a lot. But I fly a lot, you see, now. And so I fly, it makes it seem as though I'm here a lot because I keep popping in and out. But I often try and get back to Japan as much as possible, because I haven't finished looking around there. Yeah.
Is that going to be your next base, do you think?
Funny you should ask that. It might well be.
Okay, just one more question then. If we could look at your diary for the next few months, what's planned for you? Rather obvious answer. I'm going to travel. I'm doing nothing but travelling for the next up until at least December. A few countries I want to go, as Israel, South America and Africa. That's what I intend to do. And what about the tour?
Sometime next year, depending on the film that I'm doing.
And the film you're doing, is this something of your own creation? Or?
No, it's was brought to my attention by Clive Donner. It's a period of the life of an expressionist painter called Egon Schiele. And it's around the period 1900-1918. And takes place in Vienna and Paris. And this is a sort of an intimate portrait of his relationship with his model. Not too intimate. It's not a sensationalist. Just good cuisine, you know, good food, that kind of thing.
Okay, we will look forward to it and look forward to the tour as well. Thanks, David.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
I wish you could swim like dolphins can swim. Though nothing will keep us together. We can beat them forever and ever. Or we can be heroes just for one day.
So, we now leave 1977, Stuart Grundy and David Bowie, and leap forward 13 years to 1990, the year in which The Simpsons first appeared on American TV, Operation Desert Shield starts in Kuwait, leading to Gulf War I, Nelson Mandela is released from prison after serving 28 years of servitude, and of particular interest, given what we're about to hear, the Berlin Wall is torn down and the east and west halves of the city are united. And we're about to listen to Nicky Campbell in the presence of Iggy Pop. Jimmy Osterberg, aka Iggy Pop, was famously a huge influence on Bowie's Ziggy Stardust character and his travelling companion and flatmate in the highly creative part of David's career that was the mid-70s. A Berlin-based couple of years that saw the release of Bowie's so-called Berlin trilogy of Low, Heroes and Lodger, but also saw our hero guide his friend Iggy Pop away from his guitar-driven back catalogue into electronica with the game-changing album The Idiot, which David co-wrote and produced. So, just how did this reckless, primitive Detroit rocker become mixed up with a man who would change the face of music? Several times, actually. Well, go on then, ask him, Nicky.
When did you become involved with David Bowie then, Iggy?
I ran into him and this guy, Tony DeFries, was handling him.
That was his manager,
in Max's, in a bar in New York, Max's, Kansas City, in 1970. I was up there, the Stooges had broken up. We got kicked off Elektra for making Funhouse because nobody, sold Zilch. I knew it was going to sell Zilch, but I made it anyway because I knew it was really good. And so I had a 4-way methadone tab and a Habit and I had 25 cents and a ticket to New York City. So I said, I'm going to go to New York City. I'm going to make my fortune. I'm going to get that band back and get the Stooges rolling over my dead body, etc. Sort of a John Wayne thing. Montgomery Clift, I'll show you, And so I went into town and met these guys. Sort of basically I was hanging out at this friend of mine's house and he kept calling me saying, well, there's this guy, David Bowie, and he's down here and he's a singer from England and he's got this manager and they got some deals and they want to meet you. And I was watching a Jimmy Stewart movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
I know it, yeah.
About how he cleans up all the corruption in Washington. I was completely into it. I was almost in tears. And I was like, I couldn't tear myself away from the movie. My friend kept calling me. He said, get down here. You could do yourself a favor, And I went, oh, all right, So I went down there and kind of ended up, by the end of the night, kind of hooking up with those guys to make some records, And basically, they didn't want the Stooges. They just wanted me. And then I smuggled the Stooges in later. Oh no, we've got the Stooges. They're in London. Oh no.
And it was the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship with David Bowie, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I mean, it didn't work out with the Stooges. I mean, they didn't get along with him, and he didn't get along with them. But he and I got along. I liked him. And,
what did you like about him?
His more he has a wider perspective than most rock guys, like basic rock guys. They want to do the same thing over and over and over. It's like, hey, I'm on top and I'm the rock guy and and I know what is music. If it rocks, it's cool, and if it doesn't rock, it sucks. And I never surrender. And this is my tattoo. And you know what I mean? It's sort of men's club or some sort of thing, like True magazine. But he had a wider perspective. He was aware. He's an aware person. And he was aware of dance, theater, light opera, all different musical formats.
We were speaking
like
just
that.
during that last record. We were speaking about Frank Sinatra. How much you
I'm
love
really
Frank
into Sinatra. Yeah, Sinatra was really, really important for me.
Then you moving back to Bowie. You produced, he produced a couple of your albums, didn't he? In the late 70s, you were in Berlin with him.
Mm-hmm.
You knew him during that low period, that Heroes period.
Yeah,
where everyone in the press portrayed him as being really down in the depths of depression and making all this music. What was he like during that time?
Well, it was a pretty good time, really. I mean, basically, we're both living in this. I mean, the Wall was great because at that time it kept like the normal world of normal people. I can't stand that world. It kept. I didn't think he liked it much either. It kept them out, and we'd both been living in L.A. And in L.A. at that time and pretty much now the value system is real clear. How famous are you? How rich are you? How much can you help me? How handsome are you? How clear is your skin? You know what I mean? How big is your muscle? It's just all, that's it, cut and dried, baby. You know, and it's real boring, you know. And in Germany at that time, Berlin was just, it was just these little old grannies who'd lived through the war, shuffling around, who couldn't get out of there. Draft dodgers, a lot of draft dodgers, because that's where you could go to avoid the draft. A few children, and a lot of sort of strange, stubborn artists, and they just didn't have this ass-kiss attitude like they had in the States, you know, or in most entertainment centers. They didn't have like a, you know, like they didn't have this sort of like in Paris, you get this kind of hedonistic attitude. You know, it's cool. Let's just take some heroin, and it's cool. You know what I mean, and all like that. But in Berlin, they were very thoughtful and direct, and it was a very proletarian sort of vibe. And when you'd work at the studio, it was very workmanlike, and they would go deeper into things. The engineer we worked with on those records, on Lust for Life and Idiot, and Low and Heroes, this guy Edward Meyer. When Edward went to school, he had to, as part of his final exam, he had to know how to pour the actual mold to make a master record. You know, and most engineers don't have to know about stuff like that or don't even care. It was just a different feeling. And also, there was no real authority in the town. That was great, too, because it was a 4-power zone. The police didn't act like police. They didn't care what you did. They used to pick me, like I'd get drunk in the street and fall down. They'd pick me up and take me home. You know, which is nice in a way. You know, It was friendly. There was a friendly, small town atmosphere. There was never a traffic jam. It was a city designed for millions of people, and it was almost empty, and not like it is now. So that you could always drive really easily in the street. You know, I lived with him for about a year, and then after that, the next 2 years, I lived just behind his place in a 4th floor walk-up cold water flat I paid $80 a month US. That was my rent, you know. That was great, you know what I mean?
I am the passenger, and I ride through the city backsides. I see the stars come out of the sky. Yeah, the bright and hollow sky. You know it looks so good tonight.
So there you have it. Iggy Pop talking to Nicky Campbell about his association and friendship with David Bowie, a bond which seemingly peaked in mid-70s Berlin. I've been Mark Riley, your underqualified captain on this journey on board the musical time machine, which has been a smooth operations production for BBC Radio 4.